All right, as I said earlier, you can open up to the book of Exodus. Book of Exodus, the first chapter, and I may, for reference, want to be able to see the end of Genesis, but it's all right there together. Making a big switch in our narrative today. Our story is about to follow a drastic turn from where we've been the last few weeks, looking at Joseph, and even before that, looking at Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and the story and the last part of the book of Genesis that kind of zooms in on this one family and this one lineage that we talked about, how God was faithful, and how Abraham expressed faith in the way that they lived their lives. And so we hinted last week that things were about to change drastically, and so this week we're gonna kind of dive into that and look at that. I want to show you something. I actually had to borrow this from Jordan because I had some before, and I always found them frustrating, and so I think I sold mine, which is why I couldn't find it. But this is a Bible dictionary. I don't know if any of you have ever had a Bible dictionary, ever looked at a Bible dictionary. I got rid of mine because I find these things to be very frustrating. I find them to be very frustrating because do you remember taking social studies in like elementary, middle school, maybe even high school? You remember taking social studies, and that class frustrated me so much because I loved what I learned in those classes, but I hated those classes because those classes, as much as any, to me felt like busy work. Like teachers had to come up with stuff for us to do because that was their job. And so what you had to do, at least in the classes that I took, was a bunch of definitions. Do you remember writing definitions like nonstop? You had to have words that you had to go look up, and you had to write the definitions, but you couldn't just write the definitions. You had to kind of gather it from some of the reading you were supposed to have, or you could just turn to the back and you could write the stuff that was in there. It frustrated me because the definitions never seemed to end, and they were long, formal, technical definitions, which is the same thing that you get out of a Bible dictionary whenever you need to learn about something very, very specific. And so you get these very technical answers to words, and I get that these Bible dictionaries have a place. It's just not one that I found nearly as useful as maybe other people do. I don't know, because they sell all kinds of these things is. But the problem with the social studies class, the problem with the Bible dictionary, the problem with writing all these definitions is that you were writing definitions about people and about events and about places and kind of the intersection of all of those things. And what made the class so bad is that all of these things were these like diverse, dynamic stories that consisted of these massive historical figures at the crossroads of history, and you reduce them down to these little definitions. You reduce them down to these few words, and you're supposed to describe like the Battle of the Bulge in a two-sentence a two-sentence definition. But the problem is, history isn't meant to be told in definitions. It's meant to be told in a story. And so likewise, the Christian faith isn't meant to be told in definitions. These dictionaries can be helpful, but they don't really tell the full story. This Bible that I have here, this was my Bible in high school. I got this when I was, 15, 16 years old, and this was my Bible that I carried with me everywhere that I went in high school. I don't know if you can see that. Can you see like what's there? Just so you know, where you're sitting right there, I can read it as well from where you're sitting. Like, I can read it right here just as well. Like, I have as much a chance of reading this right now as you do of reading this thing. And somehow I read this whenever I was in high school. This week, I did one of the most painful, awful, humbling, terrible things I've ever had to do. I increased the font size on my phone. It was terrible. And I'm pretty sure that Emily has already got some brochures on an assisted living home for me as well. But there's no chance I have to read this. But in the back here, you have some like look up certain things and go to these verses to get information about this thing. I would tell you what some of those are, but that's not going to happen. So, but I would use this all the time to try to like find information. Like I was trying to learn topically what the Bible was about and what the Bible taught us. I tried my best to do that. But it always frustrated me. Every now and then you'd read some stuff that was pretty good, and the Bible would be very direct in how it addressed things. But typically, the Bible does not do that. So what happens is that you have these little, concordance or a Bible dictionary, and you look things up, and you get a definition, but the definition is so static and so sterile, it doesn't really convey a whole lot. And that's because we're looking for something to fit into a definition or even just a chapter and verse, but that's not how God gives us his story. The Bible is not meant to be told in definitions or even chapter and verse. It's meant to be told in a story. We saw how this worked back in the book of Revelation, and it's just as true at the end of the Bible as it is at the beginning of the Bible. And to paraphrase Tim Keller, if you want to know the definition of faith, you don't look up the word faith in a Bible dictionary. You read about the story of Abraham. And if you want to know the definition of salvation, you read the book of Exodus. And so that's where we're about to go right now, into the story of salvation, the story that is being told in this book that we start this morning, the book of Exodus. And I preached through this book when we first moved into this building. You can go back and listen to those online right now. You can listen to some of those sermons that are there. And I preached through it kind of line by line, verse by verse, all the way through it. It's one of my favorite sermon series that I have done during my time here. And I love being able to go back and look at some of those and kind of remember how God used that in my own life and think through some of that stuff. And we're not going to go through it nearly as slow. I think it took us close to a year to get through it at the time. We're going to get through it, Lord willing, in about 4 to 6 weeks. We'll see. Don't hold me to that. But that's the goal, to try to get through that. And as we get into the book of Exodus, what we're going to see is that it's a big story about how God keeps his promise in ways we don't expect, even when we fear that he has completely forgotten us. And so as the book of Exodus opens, we're reminded of just how fickle our world can be. And if you'll remember last week, we looked at the life of Joseph and how he ends the book of Genesis with these instructions for his son. So this is a recap, a reminder from last week. This is previously on the Pentateuch. Genesis 50, verse 24. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here. And so Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. And so what we remember is that Joseph's faith was rock solid. He says, one day God will come and he will visit this place. And when he does, I want you to bring me along to the place where we go, the place that God has promised us. Take my bones with you. And he dies a hero in Egypt. He's a hero to his family, and he's a hero to Egypt, having saved both by his prophecies and his dream interpretations and his ability to kind of form these structures and these plans to help them all survive this famine. He dies a hero. His legacy is secure. I imagine they probably named something after him somewhere there in Egypt. And so let's read the opening of the book of Exodus, and let's see where the story has gone now as we move to this next book. Exodus 1 through 8. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. And then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So a couple of important things for us to note here in these few verses, two things in particular to note. One, Israel grew in numbers to the point that we'll see here in a minute that the king of Egypt, the new Pharaoh, was nervous about it. He was worried. He was like, there's a lot of these people. There's a lot of these people that are here. This makes me nervous. I don't like this. And so this is a good thing, right? We can all acknowledge this is a good thing that Israel has grown to this point, that they are so strong. There's so many people. For most of the end of the book of Genesis, we're really just talking about the lineage of one family, but that now has expanded greatly, and Israel is big and powerful. It sounds like maybe some of those promises to Abraham are becoming true. More people than the stars in the sky and the grains of the sand on the beach. It is a good thing that they have grown to this. But the problem is that as the nation grows and as generation after generation come about and continue to grow, the name and the legacy of Joseph gets smaller and smaller until he's completely forgotten. This national hero is completely forgotten. You ever think about that? All the things that you drive by every day that are named after somebody that you drive by or drive over or drive around, they're named after somebody, and you have absolutely no idea who they are. You have no clue who they are. I think about this every time that there's a Tennessee basketball game or a concert that happens at what is now known as Food City Center. Which was formerly called Thompson Bowling Arena, which I think technically it is still Thompson Bowling Arena, but they don't call it that. They call it Food City Center. And so even with the stipulations built in that they weren't allowed to fully change the name of that building, they managed to give it a different name. And I've been a UT fan my whole life, and I did not know who Thompson or Bowling was until last night whenever I looked it up. And so Thompson was a donor who gave $5 million toward the construction of that building, which that's what we pay our quarterbacks now, which is kind of, so things have changed a little bit now, but he gave $5 million and got it named after him, and Bowling was the president of the university at the time. I don't even know if he's a good one or if he's just like, hey, I'm here, you're going to put my name on this thing. But I didn't even know who those people were. I've been a Tennessee fan my whole life. I've heard the name of the building, and I knew it was named after somebody, but I didn't know who they were. Which is just a good reminder to us. We are seldom as important as we think we are. That's even more true if you are rich or famous. I'm decidedly neither, but the principle still applies. We will be forgotten faster than any of us could ever imagine. That's a total aside. That's a whole different sermon, but just something to note as we go through this. So this sets the stage for the rest of the book. But as the story is unfolding, let's consider the tension that we kind of enter into here in the first chapter of Exodus. God's people have grown in number, but not so much in power. They're a threat, but they don't have any position of authority. The one position that they had, second in charge, was Joseph. He's gone. No one has risen to take his place from Israel. Instead, there's a new king in Egypt, and Israel is all but forgotten as far as a place or a seat at the table with the power brokers in Egypt. So they are many, but they are still very much in Egypt. Part of the promise has come true. They have grown in number, but not all of it, especially not the part that Joseph was counting on, that one day they would leave this place and they would go to the place that they were promised. So part has come true, but not all of it. They are still far from being in that place. They are still far from being the strong, independent nation that Abraham had envisioned when it was first promised them. And all this talk from their fathers, from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and even Joseph, is starting to feel and look just a bit foolish. Like, seriously? We're supposed to have all these things, but at this point, what we know for some other texts is that roughly 400 years has passed since Joseph's life. Since Joseph said, surely God will come. 400 years. Just think about how old this country is. Like 400 years is a long time. I wonder how hard it would have been to keep telling that story about the promises God had made and how he would show up for them. 400 years is a long time to tell a story that has no payoff. 400 years is a long time to tell a story that no one alive can really vouch is even true anymore. 400 years is a long time to sit in silence, convinced that one day you'd finally hear something. 400 years is a long time to endure growing oppression from your Egyptian counterparts. And yet here they were. And I suspect that none of us can really relate to 400 years of silence and suffering, but all of us can relate to the feeling that they must have had in that moment. Asking the question, what is going on? Where are you? This is not the life I was promised. You know, David says in the Psalms, like, he talks about how we're supposed to be able to lie down in green pastures by still waters. And I just wonder if they're not just like, how many times have you asked the question, like, where are my green pastures? Where are my still waters? Where are these things that I was promised? Where are these things? There's no need to compare notes here. I know that human nature, that's kind of what we try to do. I mean, one may suffer more, one of you may be lonelier, but we all feel the weight of unmet expectations in our life on some level. And sometimes those expectations were for something that was never promised and we never should have had. And sometimes, like Israel, they are unmet expectations from something that we were promised. But we all know what it's like to hear silence when we call out for an answer. We know that loneliness. We know that sadness. We know that confusion and that frustration. We know that anger. We know all of that. We know it well. So what do we do when that happens? What do we do? And I don't say this flippantly. Like these are the moments that try our souls. These are the moments. These are the dark nights, like I talked about with Jacob. Whenever we are wrestling with God. So what do we do in that moment? If you keep reading, you'll see how all of this unfolds for Israel in this moment. Let's look down in verse 15. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives. So the king of Egypt, Pharaoh, I don't know, he says, look, they're getting too big, too strong, too powerful. There's too many of them. We can't stop them. We need to do something about this. So he comes up with a plan. And the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipporah and the other was named Puah. And when you serve which is super important that they have a name in here. These are two people that for many reasons should not be named at all in a text like this. Not the least of which because they are women. Not only are they women, they're midwives who would have been like the women who likely were barren and would have had an even lower social status there. So there's no reason we should know their names. None. Which incidentally, we have no idea what the king of Egypt's name is here, but we know these two midwives' names. And so we know their names here, and it gives them to us, and it says, the king says to them, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? And let the male children live. And the midwife said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and they give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. And then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Okay. So what does this have to do with God's silence? Like the narrative so far is about the suffering of Israel, the suffering of the Hebrews, and then we get this story about the midwives. Like it's a bit of a non sequitur going to this. This is not really addressing the story or the tension that we are stepping into that is at hand. It is just a little bit. If anything, it's kind of continuing the narrative of how things have gone. But it's an odd story on any level to be able to read this. But it's doubly odd since it doesn't seem to have anything to do with God's silence and Israel's unmet expectations, other than to say it's even worse than we thought it was. But we have these two midwives, the both named here. We have them, and they're supposed to kill the baby boys and instruct all the other midwives to do the same. But they come up with this plan basically to say, hey, we tried, we gave it our best shot, but we couldn't get there in time. And by the time they'd already given birth, like we can't really do that. We can't cover for ourselves, so we can't get there and do the dirty work. Sorry, we tried, but we can't make it happen. So this is shown to be a sign of their faithfulness in glorifying of God in the midst of this persecution and this instruction from the king of Egypt. And so while it doesn't appear to advance the story and the tension that we have, it's a nice little story about these women who stood up against power and evil and won. These women with no power and no status, they stood up, believed in God, did the right thing, and they won this round. So it's just a nice little encapsulated thing. It's a nice little all right, well done, Shipra and Puah, good job. You are a good example for us. And then the story keeps going. And I'm going to read a huge section of chapter 2 here. I'm going to read a big chunk here. I'm going to read 22 verses of this, but I'm going to do it because, and I'll dive more into these verses next week. But all I want you to do is I want you to kind of feel the awkwardness of this transition. I know that's a weird way to approach studying the Bible, but I just want you to come with me on this. I want you to feel kind of the awkwardness of where this goes, and we'll get more into this stuff next week. I want to drive home a point that I think will serve us well this morning. So we're about to be introduced to a character that will dominate our text for the next month or so. A character that we all know and is one of the largest, maybe the largest figure in all of the history of world religion. We're about to meet Moses. We're about to meet Moses, and we're going to see 3 different scenes from his life. Again, I'll get into these scenes more next week, but for now, we're going to get 3 different scenes from his life. So Exodus 2, verse 1. Now a man from the house of Levi went and took his wife, a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and while her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. And she took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse your child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take the child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him. And when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, because I drew him out of the water. Verse 11. So that's scene 1. That's what we probably, one of the most well-known scenes from Moses' life. He's a baby put into a basket, sent down the river, shows up in Pharaoh's court. Pharaoh's daughter is there, and then all kinds of irony in this. She ends up instead of Moses being dead, she ends up saving Moses, and then gives him back to his mother to nurse him and pays her for it. Crazy story, great story. All right, that's good. I don't know what it has to do with what we've been looking at, but it's a great story. It's good. Then we get to verse 11. One day when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. And he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. When he went out to the next day, behold, 2 Hebrews were struggling together, and he said to the man in the wrong, "Why did you strike your companion?" And he answered, "Who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "Surely the thing is known." And when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had so that's scene 2. Now scene 3. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water, and drew water, and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. The shepherds came and drove them away, But Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. And when they came home to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flock." And he said to his daughters, "Then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah, and she gave birth to a son and called his name Gershom and said, "I have been a sojourner in a foreign land." So 3 scenes for Moses' life, all right? We get his birth amidst the declaration that all baby boys should be killed. The implication here is that he lived, at least in part, because of Shiphrah and Puah and their faithfulness and their bravery. The second scene we got is his attempt to save his fellow Hebrews that were suffering and ends up killing an Egyptian, hiding the Egyptian, and then the next time that he sees 2 Hebrews fighting and he tries to kind of step in and play peacemaker and play judge, what ends up happening is they're like, "Don't be talking to me like that. I know what you did." He gets nervous, takes off, runs to hide in the desert, and then we have the third scene, which is where he meets his eventual wife, interjects for them and for her sisters, does a great thing. He ends up getting married and starting a family. So we get to know Moses, and we get to know a little bit about his early story, kind of his backstory, a little bit of an early biopic here. And so we'll look more at these next week. But for now, what I want to see is how this story, these stories here bridge the gap from Genesis 50 and Joseph's promise that surely God will come to our rescue to Exodus 1 and 2. And we feel the tension that carries over from one book to the other. It's almost as like Genesis 50 just runs right into Genesis or into Exodus 1. Like the narrative just kind of keeps going. It makes perfect sense in how it all flows, right? We go through all of this and we see kind of the growth of the nation of Israel. Part of God's promise is coming true. It builds as we learn that Joseph has been forgotten, so there's an extra bit of tension in the story. It builds as we learn the king of Egypt has been threatened by the size of the Hebrews and how he kind of turns on them. It builds as we meet Shiphrah and Puah, and then it just kind of goes away. We just go to the story of Moses. It's like you're reading this and you're like, I felt like we were in the middle of a story, and now the story has just gone away. You know, perhaps it continues a little bit there with the midwives' bravery, but that's about it. Outside of this little mini, outside of that, this little mini autobiography that we have of Moses seems completely out of place. Even more so whenever you read the next little paragraph. This is going to be verse 23. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. And their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning. And God remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and with Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. It's like when you're reading chapter 2 for me, like chapters 1 and 2, it's like you're right in the middle of a movie. You're right in the middle of a story. And then somebody changed the channel. And the channel that you went to was a biopic about Moses' early life. And then you just stayed on that channel. And then somebody flipped back because that went to a commercial, and they flipped back to that other channel, and you kind of get to this spot that's like you feel like it just kind of picked up right where you left off. It's like somebody's flipping back and forth, and it's nice. I mean, what it says here is awesome at the end of chapter 2. God remembers his covenant. God heard their cries. God saw the people. God knew what they were enduring. God knew. God knew. That alone would be a worthy end to our sermon this morning. God doesn't forget you in your suffering. Keep crying out. Keep lifting your lament. Keep bringing that petition before the Lord. He will hear you. He knows. He knows your pain. He knows your suffering. He knows your trials. God knows all of it. This is a great application from this sermon, and one you absolutely should take home with you today. But I also want you to see kind of how this all holds together. That the end of chapter 1 and the little channel flipping incident here over this biopic of Moses wasn't an accident, and it's not even bad storytelling that happens here. You see, before we are ever told that God heard the cries of his people, or that he knew them, or their pain, or their suffering, we're given the story of Shiphrah and Puah and of Moses. And so the question that you need to ask is, why are we given those two stories right there in that place like that? Why not move the end of chapter 2 up to follow the end of like chapter 1, verse 14? So if you look chapter 1, verse 14, it ends there with the suffering that they are enduring. So if you open your Bibles and you can see in verse 14, it says, "So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves, and they made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field. And in all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves." Do you know what would go perfectly after that verse? Exodus 2:23. "And during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God knew, and God heard, and God saw, and God, all of those things." That fits perfect after verse 14, right? Like if you're telling the story, that's how you tell the story. They were suffering, God heard, God knew. That's what would have made sense. It would, except that the storyteller, who is likely Moses, who wrote the book of Moses, which is what we're reading right now, is essentially showing us that in these stories of these three characters, what he tells us at the end of chapter 1 and then all the way through chapter 2, he's telling us what he says at the end of chapter 2 is shown throughout the rest of chapter 2. God heard them and God knew, and that's why God was using these faithful women. God heard them and God knew, and that's why God was sparing this baby in a basket, and why his eye was on him whenever he fled to Midian, and how he found his wife. These stories are evidence that God was working a plan for the redemption of Israel long before Israel ever knew or felt the impact of that plan. Are you all tracking with me on this? So what is happening here is that we're learning the story of these three characters, the two midwives and of Moses, but they are not told in isolation. What is happening in this story is that we are being shown God's faithfulness before we are being told God is faithful. As they groaned as slaves, no one was looking at these midwives and saying, "There you are, God. We've been looking for you. We've been looking for you for 400 years, and there you are with these women." They were asking where he was in that moment when they were being extra persecuted. But he was right there the whole time. No one was looking over at a basket floating down the Nile and thinking, "There's our deliverer. That's the one that we've been hoping would deliver us and save us. I knew God had heard us." No one saw that basket going down the Nile and thought that. All they were doing is enduring harsh treatment and working as slaves and wondering and probably just assuming God had forgotten them and God had forgotten the promise. And as that basket washed up on Pharaoh's doorstep, no one was looking at that and saying, "There's a faithful God." Look at even whenever Moses tries to do something to stop the Egyptians from treating the Israelites with such cruelty. Moses intervenes, and instead of saying, "Hooray, our deliverer has come. This is our revolutionary we've been looking for," they look at Moses and they're like, "What are you going to do? You coming after me now? Who do you think you are, Moses?" And scared, Moses runs away because he thought he'd been found out. Let's even go back to the whole 400 years and the growth and the strength of the nation as a whole. Did anyone look during that 400 years at what was happening and say, "Man, look at how God has come through on that promise. We really are as numerous as the stars in the sky. As best we can tell, no. No one did that. Why? Because they were enduring suffering and they felt like they were forgotten. Friends, I point all this out and the way this story unfolds because even though God hears, even though God knows, even though God listens, even though God is at work, it is almost always in unexpected ways, through unexpected people, at unexpected times, with unexpected results. So unexpected that until we are actually delivered, we can't even see God's hand at work. So take heart. Whatever it is that you are enduring today, whatever prayer you are praying that is not being answered, whatever suffering you are enduring that is unending, whatever it is that you are enduring or feeling like you have been forgotten, it may be that your answer to that prayer is floating down a river in a basket covered with pitch and about to land at Pharaoh's doorstep. You just don't know it yet. It may also be that you see yourself somewhere else in this story. Not so much that you are the Israelites in the midst of suffering, at least not primarily. It may be that you have a role to play in someone else's story, like Shiphrah and Puah. It may be that God is working a plan to deliver someone, and he is looking to use your faithfulness to help tell that story. There is no Moses without the faithfulness of those women. There is no deliverer. There is no book of Exodus. There is no Exodus. There is no salvation without them. Now, I want to be careful here. God doesn't need them. God doesn't need us to do his work. I'm quite sure that had these women not stepped in with their faithfulness and their bravery, God would have accomplished his will through someone else. But it may be that God's faithfulness in someone else's life is accomplished through your faithfulness to him. I'm not saying you are someone's deliverer. I'm not saying you are someone's salvation. But I am saying that God might just use you in the midst of all of that. So when you feel like your prayers are starting to hit a ceiling, when you wonder if God has gone silent and you wonder if he's there at all, I want you to remember this. In Exodus, we are told that God saw, God heard, and God knew. And in response, he sent 2 faithful women and a baby in a basket, which doesn't look at all like God's work. I don't think there was a single person in the entire nation of Israel that was praying for either of those things. Nobody was asking for that. Nobody was asking for 2 women that they probably didn't even know their name at the time to be faithful to God. Nobody was asking. Nobody was saying, God, will you make these women faithful? Nobody was praying, and I think probably Moses' family was praying that Moses would be alive and make it down the river and not die. But I don't think anybody in Israel was praying, God, would my deliverer, would our deliverer, would the person who's going to lead us out of slavery, that's going to lead us to salvation, God, would you have him be born today and put in a basket and sent down the river? They didn't know to pray for that. They didn't know to ask for that. And yet God was working and God was doing that. So often God's work doesn't look anything like God's work. It looks like faithful men and women following God, doing the right thing, and trusting in him. The promise that we have now moved much further down the story, much further down the line, is that we have the testimony of Jesus. The testimony of another baby who was also amidst a group of children that should have been killed by a king that was jealous, whose life mirrors Moses in so many ways, who Moses' life is a type. We talked about this when we studied the book of Exodus before. It is a type, a precursor, a shadow of the person of Jesus. And so in Jesus, God, what we have is that we see something even greater, that God came down. In Jesus, God entered into our slavery, our groaning, our unmet expectations. And then he took them on himself. He carried them to the cross, which, mind you, the disciples did not think that looked much like God working at all. In fact, it looked like God had abandoned them, forgotten them, and made them all to look like fools. But then Jesus walked out of the grave, new life in his hands, which means you don't just have a God who knows your suffering, which is what we see at the end of the book of Exodus. You have a Savior who shares it. You don't just have a God who works behind the scenes. You have Jesus who stepped onto the stage of history for you. And because he lives, you can trust that even now, in your waiting, God has not forgotten you. He's not forgotten you in your suffering, and he has not left you in your sin. That you, like Israel, needed to be saved. You needed to be rescued. You needed those things. Like Israel, we want our suffering, our pain, our frustration, and we want the silence to end. And like Israel, our biggest problem isn't that the world has let us down or that this world has met us with troubles. It's that we need to be saved. We need to be rescued. We need to be delivered. And it may just be that deliverance and all of that you are praying for, all of these things that you want, all of that is working right now in ways that you could never imagine, ways that you could never predict. You talk to any saint, you talk to anyone who has followed Christ for any length of time, and they will tell you, God was working in this way and I couldn't even see it. God was doing this thing over here in this place, and I had no idea it was even happening. God was preparing my heart in that moment so that I could meet someone else in their moment. God was doing this in a way that I could not have even fathomed he was preparing me for. You talk to anyone who has followed Christ, and they would tell you that their own deliverance, their own forgiveness was coming from something they could never have seen coming at all. Something they didn't pray for, something they didn't ask for. Why? Because God was at work long before we ever knew. But God knew. And God knew that we needed a Savior. And so the silence is broken in Jesus Christ. The deliverer has come, and his name is Jesus. And because of Jesus, you can be certain that God hears, that God knows, but most importantly, you can be certain that God saves. And that is what we need to know more than anything else. And so let the story of Israel, the story of Exodus, the story of Shiphrah and Puah encourage your heart this morning. That even when you don't know how to pray, even when you don't see God at work, even whenever all you feel is silence, even whenever you feel like you have been completely lost and forgotten, God is at work, and it might just be that your salvation is in a basket in the river, and you don't even know it's there. But God does. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you know so much better than we do our own hearts, our own needs. Father, we would not know that we need you to rescue us and to save us. We would not know the need that we have for Jesus Christ to come, to dwell among us, to die, and then to be risen. We wouldn't know to ask for that. But God, you orchestrated that. You sent that. You made that happen. And you put all that together before the foundation of the world. Because you knew. So, Father, may we take heart this morning in that. That we can trust you. And that you are at work, even when we can't see it. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.